What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Tattoo Critiques. This week we're going to be going over apprentice tattoos, and I really love going over these because I can really dig deep and let you guys know what the hell you did wrong. So strap in, grab your coffee, and let's see what we got. Alright, the first tattoo sent in is from Lilith. And Lilith, you sent in this sweet, sinful little cupcake that you said you did on yourself. You mentioned that you've only done 2 tattoos so far, both of them being on your own leg. Right off the top, when I look at this tattoo, it seems like the lines aren't very consistent. And I don't necessarily think that's your technique, but rather the tools you're using. Especially when we look up at that word sweet. I can tell you've got a nice, clean hand motion going on, but some areas are just more red than others, and some areas of those lines are just completely missing. When we look at the paper around the cupcake, I can tell that you're shading in the right direction. But I do notice some needle striations here and there that make the shade not as smooth as it should be. Now, of course, you can get those striations from any higher end needle, but seeing those other spots around the tattoo just kind of raise a red flag. So again, my first thought is maybe just try some different tools and see where that gets you. Now, as far as your design goes, this is something that you should probably have down on paper first before putting it on skin, especially being something so simple, as every little mistake becomes magnified on tattoos so small. The sweet isn't necessarily centered in between the horns, and its muffin top is hanging over a little more on one side than the other. And the word sinful itself really isn't that clean either. Wait a minute, are those capital L's? They surely don't look like capital S's or even lowercase s's, to be honest.
And there it is, the capital letter S.
My suggestion to you would maybe be to work on nothing but lettering for a while. Get those down perfect before moving on to anything bigger. Because if you can't really pull off sweet or sinful as clean as possible, then there really is no reason for you to be working on a cupcake like this at all. But I would love to see this tattoo healed, as I do think there are a few areas that I think might fall out completely. Like the sprinkles. They're just not really in there the way they should be. And again, I do think that might be your tools. I know this is only your second tattoo, but you want to make sure that you're using as best tools as you can possibly afford, as you're only doing yourself a disservice if you're using cheap tools, because you're gonna end up with results like this. But thank you so much, Lilith, for sending that in and letting me discuss it. Alright, the next tattoo sent in is from Moi Sanchez. And Moi, you sent in this beautifully composed black and gray tattoo, and it says here you've been tattooing for just over 1.5 years. Before we get too far into the technical part of this tattoo, the composition is generally what people notice first, and you nailed it. Now, as far as the details go, my eyes are led immediately to the eyes of the girl in the mask, which in art is generally what our eyes are led to first. I do love how the white is placed in the eye. It's very attractive and also helps lead our eyes to that spot in particular. She does seem to have one wandering eye, which makes me curious if that's how the reference was, but I'm betting not. But I do love the aesthetic, the little glitchy feel, as well as everything else working around her. Now, doing several dots the same size does become very tricky, as they all have to be pretty close to the same size. And for the most part, I do think you did a good job with those, but there are some dots that do seem a bit smaller than others, and again, that is a very tricky technique. I do think you're using the right amount of light shades in contrast with those dark shades. It's not too much, and I think it'll heal pretty well. And I do love how that little guy's doing the Fortnite shoot dance. Nice touch. When we look at the word broken down at the bottom, it's not the cleanest, but it is a very small word, again being pretty tough. Now, this large rectangle in the background going up behind her is pretty straight, but one part does catch my eye, and that's the part that goes above the tuft in her hat, how it kind of just ends off in a cookie crumb kind of feel. My first thought is maybe you made a little mistake and you tried to improvise. Everywhere else on the tattoo, those lines end with a really nice fade or end abruptly and perfectly. But I do feel like I'm nitpicking here, because overall this tattoo is pretty solid. And thank you so much, Moi, for sending that in. Alright, the next tattoo sent in is from Kane Ferguson. And Kane, you sent over this ghost face mask from Scream. Upon initial inspection, I will definitely suggest to you the same thing that I suggested to Lilith, is to probably use some different tools. Because right now, my eyes immediately go to the outline that's running around the white part of the mask. This thing's got a deeper trench than all the soldiers in World War II. And of course, that's something that can be remedied with either new cartridges or even a new machine. Currently, whatever you're using to outline this tattoo isn't working. I don't really see one good, clean, consistent line in this entire tattoo. I would be interested to see what your other tattoos look like, because even if you were heavy-handed, had you the right tools, this likely won't be happening. Because this one in specific, the outline looks like it could have even been a barbed needle. That just means that one or more of the needles inside the grouping of needles is bent or hinged, where it's essentially catching the skin every time it comes out, which will in turn create a scar. There's not really a way around it. That also could have been caused by you, the artist, hitting either the bottom or the edge of the ink cap when you go to dip. The next thing I want to bring up is the color packing in all the solid black areas. Now, I know you don't need me to tell you that those areas are full of holidays or full of skin tone, and that's usually remedied by just slowing down a bit, working in good layers, because right now it kind of just looks like you rushed through the entire thing. Now, something I don't see in those black areas are those big trenches, telling me that there was probably something wrong with your needle. But I digress. On to the face shading. Now this is where I can tell that your hand really isn't moving all that consistent. Your goal with smooth light shading like this is to move your hand in a very smooth and consistent direction where the light and shadows are going to be moving. What I mean by that is, normally I work from the darkest areas first, pushing away from those shadows into the light area, very slowly working up those layers. You don't have to put them all in there at once. And that's kind of what it looks like you're doing here. I also think you may be using too dark of a wash in this area. You could have gotten away with something lighter, maybe even a 1 or 2 drop. I know this will heal a bit lighter, but it's still going to be a bit too harsh on that face. The contrast is just going to be too much. Now, something I do like in this tattoo is the way that you've got the mask's eye raised with that shading that's around the eye and really gives it a 3-dimensional shape. I do wish you had done something similar with the other eye. Now, I know, as a newer tattooer, we do sometimes bite off more than we can chew, or sometimes our confidence is a bit more than it should be, which could be a good and a bad thing. Because doing a tattoo like this, you are testing your limits, but at the same time, somebody does have to live with this. My suggestion to you would be to work on those palm size or smaller tattoos. Get some clean lines down, and then work on that muscle memory for the shading. Because you'll probably look back on this tattoo 10 years from now and be like, what was I thinking? But thank you, Kane, for sending that in and letting me talk about it. All right, the next tattoo is sent in from Mahae Gish. And Mahae, you said you've been learning for 8 years as you've been in the industry since you were 15, but you just started tattooing at 23. Now, you didn't tell me how old you are, but I do know that that means absolutely nothing. You could be sweeping a shop for 10 years. That doesn't mean that you know how to tattoo. With that being said, this is a pretty solid tattoo. So maybe sweeping those floors did pay off. The first thing I notice are these super clean lines throughout most of the tattoo. I do say most because there are a couple little spots that got away from you, like around the arm and fingers. But if we look at the outlines around the bikini and around the top of that mushroom, those outlines are pretty spotless. Even the outlines around her tattoos are pretty damn clean. And it's always nice to see a variation of line weight. One tiny thing that bugs me about this tattoo, and it could be the design, I would have loved to see just the little outline bulge where that knot is on the right side. Because right now it just looks like her hip is curving through the entire thing. It loses that 3-dimensional effect by not having that little outline there. One other tiny little thing that I could bring up is the amount of skin tone that I see in the bikini. It's just not solid black, but it's close. Overall, I really do like this piece. Now, I'm not exactly sure how long you've been an apprentice for, but it does look like you have the foundational skill set to make a good tattoo. I do appreciate you so much, Mahae, for sending that in and letting me talk about it. All right, the next tattoo is sent in from Brisia from Costa Rica. Brisia, you sent over this color tattoo that you said was your first color piece, and you've been tattooing for about 5 months. All right, Brisia, this really isn't too bad for it being your first color tattoo. But your lines aren't the greatest. Now, of course, this is something you can still practice while doing color tattoos, but the lines should be your main focus. You want to make sure your lines are as good as possible before working on shading or any type of color, because after all, these are the foundational skills that you need to set yourself up for a good tattoo career. My one big gripe about this tattoo is the lack of any kind of black shading. And that's something that you need in a tattoo like this, where there's a lot of stuff happening close together. You need something to set each individual piece apart. I'm not sure if that's something that you tried to do down at the bottom with these little solid black areas, but that's just not working. And I do notice you have some darker greens in those darker areas, but I really think it would benefit you to use an actual black. And something that we've definitely talked about in the past is how tattoos age, and sometimes these lighter colors like to wash out or get bleached out. You don't want to be left with nothing but skin tone and a bunch of scraggly lines. Now, I'm not saying that all these colors will fall out, but the choices that you use, the light blue, the light peaches, they might not be here in 15 years. Now, all that being said, the color is bright and very saturated, especially for being your first color tattoo. But again, you want to set yourself up for how these tattoos are going to age 15, 20 years from now. And another part that's really not helping you out any are all these little white spots that you decided to put throughout the tattoo. They're just distracting. Overall, I do think you did a good job with the color, but I would be focusing more on those outlines and some of those lighter black shades, as that's what's going to make these things last and make that color really pop. Thank you so much, Brisia, for sending that in. All right, guys, my favorite tattoo of the week, and you know we do this every time, is the tattoo sent in from Moi Sanchez. Moi, I think you did an exceptional job with this tattoo, especially the composition. And you can really tell that you took special attention to detail when it comes to every little piece around this tattoo. I think anybody would be excited to have any piece of this tattoo, and you managed to put them all in one. So Moi, keep up the good work. I'm excited to see what you put out in the future, and congratulations on being this week's winner. Now hold up, don't turn off just yet. I do have a special artist that I would love to share with you all, and that is ALØNA Tattoos out of New York City. ALØNA specializes in black and gray realism, and you can tell by looking at her work that she really goes the extra mile to put in all these little details to make them really unique. I don't know what else you would call that, love? I've been fortunate enough to watch her work every time I come to New York, and every time I see her new stuff, it's only getting better. And her technical ability really only rivals the best out there. Not to mention, she's an absolute pleasure to be around. So do yourself a favor, head on over to her page, give her a follow, and let her know I sent you. Thank you once again to all the artists who sent over their work to review today. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, I will see you all next week.